Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started, everyone. Keep your introductions coming in the chat. Thanks, everybody, for again being here this morning or this afternoon or in the evening, depending on which part of the world you're located in. Some of you joined us for our first session. As you know, this is a series for the Tuberculosis Research Advancement Center between Emory and other institutions in Georgia and across the world. My name is Comeau. Many of you know me already, and it's very nice to see the familiar names. And for those of you who I'm meeting for the first time, welcome, and I'm glad you joined us today. Today's topic is setting expectations between mentors and mentees. Our last session really focused on the foundations of mentoring, and this is some more details about aligning expectations. As we already got to, and I'll mention again, thank you for all the introductions in the chat. Keep those coming. If you're just joining us, please go ahead and add your name, your institution, your title, or say hello to people this afternoon, this morning, today, as you enter into the session. As I mentioned, this TRAC provides this training across a number of different countries and institutions. Here's a map of all of who we are here. So that's why it's fun to see you pop up in the chat and introduce yourselves as well, to see the spread of the number of people we have here. And as a reminder, or for those of you who are joining us the first time, the intention of this series is really to strengthen research on TB by increasing mentorship knowledge and skills, and to build networks of TB researchers and mentors across international institutions. I introduced myself already. My name's Comeau, and I've worked on mentor programs and mentor training for quite a while now. And you can see that I draw on experiences and resources from across a number of programs in a number of countries. Georgia, Ethiopia, Nigeria, India, Vietnam, Cambodia, and also here in the United States, in this effort to really improve and understand mentoring so that we can support scientists in their research careers. So this is not a one-size-fits-all. That's why mentoring is so important, and mentor training can be so helpful, is that this is really an opportunity for you to build the tools in your toolbox, and different things work for different people. And that's one of the things we think about as we're talking about mentorship, is how you can expand your knowledge and skills to serve a number of people as mentors. I use adult learning theory throughout the course. I believe in cultural humility and learning with you as we go through the process, and try to consider intersectionality and different positionality of our own social identities, where we live, what we're from, our disciplinary training, keeping that in consideration as we go through this experience together of training. We've already done that, so I can check that off the list. And just as a reminder, again, for those of you joining us for the first time, we had our, that was last week. Our last session was Foundations of Mentoring. Today, we're talking about setting expectations. And then next week, we have an additional session, particularly talking about, and with US mentors, about mentoring across countries, or also what it means to mentor with distance involved when you're not able to walk down the hallway and see somebody easily for your mentoring meetings. What skills and strategies can you use? So that will be next week. So today, what we're going to jump in on is talk a bit about reviewing kind of like what we mean by mentoring. I always start with a clear definition of mentoring, so we're all on the same page. Some of you here are very experienced mentors, I know just from your names. Others of you are probably beginning at mentorship. That's great. We can all learn from each other regardless of where we are in this journey. And then we're going to talk about the different tools for mentorship. Again, some of you have had experiences with these tools, and for some of you, this will be brand new. This is more informal than other presentations. Please unmute and ask a question at any point in time. Raise your hand if you want me to stop and answer a question, or please ask a question in the chat. And you'll notice Alessia here is present to help me. And if I miss your comment in the chat, I told her to flag me down and let me know. But by all means, please, we'd like you to engage, and we have moments of engagement throughout this session together. So to start with, I like to pull forward this definition that's come out recently from the, it was adapted originally from the American Psychological Association and came out in a special issue on mentoring, more in the field of psychology, but as it applies to training junior scientists, PhD students, postdocs, etc. So if, according to this definition, mentoring or a mentor is an individual with expertise who can help develop the career of mentees. And this usually has two functions. Of course, the career-related function where the mentor provides advice to enhance the mentee's professional performance and development, so skills, knowledge, guidance, and also kind of a psychosocial function. So recently, especially coming out of COVID, there's been some really good commentary and thought pieces about how we holistically mentor people. Again, thinking about positionality and intersectionality, all of our diverse identities, as well as mental health and well-being in conjunction with our career. So a career-related function, a psychosocial function, a support system for both your career pathways and balancing all that's in our lives. And really what comes across in mentorship are the formal lessons and knowledge about research and academia, clinical settings, but also but also those implicit lessons or informal lessons, those things that maybe we don't know from a faculty handbook that are really critical to understand as a new researcher who's developing a career. So important lessons related to professional development and work-life balance. That's just a really important part of mentorship. Mentorship may cover research primarily, as that's the focus of this training series and this grant and this program, but also mentors can help with balancing teaching and training or other service and practice responsibilities. And we're going to talk a bit about that when we show an IDP. I mentioned already, mentorship is formal and informal. So you're learning formal knowledge from your mentor, as well as role modeling or informal knowledge about how your institution works, how your career might work, professional development skills. And I also want to acknowledge that many times we're talking about a mentor singular here, but many of you will be part of mentoring teams where there is more than one mentor who is advising and supporting a trainee. And that's really important as well. And so mentorship can be one person or could be multiple people helping a specific trainee. I'm going to pause for a minute and just please, if you have any questions about that definition, please go ahead and write your questions in the chat. And also, thank you, Alessia. I wanted to mention that we have worked on a text on mentoring, and I did drop that into the chat. It provides a lot more detail on some of these things we're talking about today, so please feel free to download that and share that with whomever you might want. All right, so a minute to hear from you. I'm curious from you, what do you think when you're entering a relationship? If you could type into the chat, what do you think mentees expect from mentors, or what do they want from mentors? And I'm going to pause for a minute and allow you to type that in. What do mentees expect or want from their mentors? Guidance, absolutely. Great. Thank you, Yared, and nice to see you. Sure, they want guidance. That's one of the primary functions we want from it, that I think mentees expect from a mentor. What else? Direction, setting reasonable goals, absolutely. Advice, opportunities, what else? Guidance, support, helping provide opportunities. So yep, a couple of folks mentioning that importance of opportunities, really, again, having guidance and advice from a mentor, from someone who knows more than you do. That's really critical, right? Recognition, I think that's really important. Sure. I think mentees do expect to be seen and recognized by their mentor for the effort they're putting into their projects, for their advancement, for what they accomplish. To be seen and recognized is really important. Sure. Experience-based insight, absolutely. Such a great point, right? I think one of the reasons why mentorship is so valuable is that sometimes as a mentee, we don't even know what we need, right? We have a sense, we start this great career pathway, we have an idea about our research, but mentors kind of know what we need before we know what we need. And that can be incredibly beneficial on our career pathways. Time, yes, I think mentees do expect to have time for their mentors. It's very difficult to have successful mentorship when there's not time involved. Great responses, everybody. Keep them coming. Experience on failure and success, certainly. We talk about that a lot. One thing that mentors can do is share their own examples of success and mistakes and failures. as a way for mentees to perhaps avoid making those same mistakes, right? And also to build trust and allow mentees to feel more comfortable being vulnerable, right? And sharing their own possible mistakes. That's such a great point. Thank you for typing that in. All right, so those are some really great set of experience of when we're thinking about aligning expectations and understanding what it is we want from each other in mentorship. That's a really solid description of some of the things mentees are entering the relationship with. So let's now move forward a little bit and switch it up and think as mentors, what do mentors expect from mentees? Is it the same or different? What do mentors enter a relationship expecting from their mentees? Go ahead and type it in the chat. Commitment and genuine interest, 100%. It is so frustrating when you have a mentee that you feel like is not sincerely invested in their research project. And as a mentor, you're spending a lot of your very valuable time guiding them. You want to see that they're sincerely interested and wanting to pursue their goals. So a commitment is really important. And when we talk about our mentoring tools, the IDP and mentor-mentee agreement, that clarifies some of that commitment. Strong work ethic, absolutely. Smooth communication, follow through. Yes, if you're spending all this time developing goals, you want those actions to be accomplished. You want to hear about those actions that are accomplished. A willingness to listen. Yes, if a mentee is seeking out a mentor for their advice, listening, and I would say integrating and applying that feedback, right, is really important. Doing the required work is essential if a mentorship relationship is going to work. Hard work, engaging in their work, helping manage the mentor. Sure, that is a mutual thing, right? As mentors, we're guiding the mentees, but mentees can manage up and help a lot with that relationship too. Setting those meetings, keeping notes, prompts and reminders when needed. Absolutely. That's really important. And enthusiasm, right? Bringing energy to the relationship. That does make a really big difference, especially as we become more senior. And often we've done this work over and over again. It's really exciting to have inspiration from somebody who's new to our field or our research area. Great answers, everyone. All right. Also, as you notice, if you think back to this chat or you're reviewing it on your own screen, you can notice that there's some similarities across these expectations and there's some differences. And so when we're starting mentorship, we want to be really thoughtful about starting strong and really thinking about why it is that we're in this relationship and what do we want from it. And if you remember from our session last time, I showed you that picture of the two circles of the mentor and mentee next to each other, because this should be a mutually beneficial relationship. The outcomes for each might be a little bit different, but it should be mutually beneficial, right? The mentee should be getting some things and the mentor should be getting things from the relationship as well. And so why are expectations important? First of all of you on this call are incredibly busy, as are most mentors and mentees. And so aligning expectations from the beginning of the relationship allows us to think more carefully and to start with a strong foundation to hopefully avoid missteps later on. And those missteps often take quite a bit of time to address. So we'd like to avoid them. So mentors and mentees enter relationships with different expectations, although some may be overlapping. Both have had previous experiences with mentorship or similar relationships, right? Advisors, supervisors. Those experiences from previous relationships get carried forward into your mentoring relationship. If they've had someone who is scary when they give feedback, they're bringing that in. If you've had a mentor who was really generous and kind of flexible, you might bring that back into this relationship. And so to be cognizant of the fact that we bring these previous relationships into the current mentorship is really important, and some conversation about that is also helpful. There are outcomes we want from the relationship that can be clarified. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And also just to be mindful that the programs themselves have expectations sometimes of mentorship, and to be aware of what those are so you both can be on board with understanding that as you move forward. So it's helpful to pause for a minute before you start your mentoring relationships, or even in the middle of them, and ask, what assumptions exist? Are you making assumptions about the mentee? And as a mentee, are they making assumptions about you? And does that elicit or prompt some sort of conversation that needs to happen so that you can be clear about your expectations? So one thing to do is just really some basics of starting strong in your mentorship to align expectations. You need to meet regularly and you need to have it on the calendar, right? That's some basic logistics that need to happen. Emailing is helpful, but mentorship cannot happen only over emailing, right? So there needs to be some meeting time, even if it's on the phone, on Zoom, or if it's face to face. So start strong with aligning expectations in your first meeting. I really encourage mentees to come with an agenda and take notes, and I'm going to talk more about that in a minute, and also use your tools like an IDP. Again, we're going to talk more in detail about that in a minute, but also really thinking clearly about what you want to come from that first meeting you have with a mentee. Do you want to know more about what skills they already have and what they have, where there are gaps? Do you want to focus on their goals and timelines? Do you want to have a detailed picture or talk through big ideas? Is it friendly and personal or more formal? But really think through your first meeting with them and how you're going to start strong by aligning expectations between the two of you. I'm going to pause and say that for those of you who have been in continuous mentoring relationships, if you have a trainee starting a new program, or you're the mentee and you're the trainee yourself, you might need to stop with your mentor and reassess your relationship and see if those needs need to change if you're in a new fellowship or a new training or starting a new research project. So it's important to remember not always the same. Sometimes those needs change. Are you all still, are we okay? I'm getting some weird Zoom.
Yeah, I think you were cutting out a little bit.
It's saying that I am crashing.
I think it might be good now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, everybody. I'm getting a message saying that Zoom was crashing. But I'm still here. So, all right. We'll hope it keeps going. All right. So some ways to think about that. So start strong with your first meeting. The second thing is really thinking about your communication and feedback. Again, at the beginning of your relationship, what do you want for feedback? How do you prefer it? How does your mentee prefer it? Written, verbal, combination, face-to-face? How often? How much? Because feedback is essential to mentorship. I think this is a conversation that's really important to have early on in your relationship. What's your response time? How much time as a mentor do you need to review things? How much time or how soon do you need things back as a mentee? And perhaps prompt and ask about positive and negative examples of feedback a mentee or a mentor has had previous to your relationship that will use, could be the foundation of an example of what to do or perhaps what not to do. And then also, I'm going to get to this at the end with some tips, is really thinking about how you plan ahead for evaluation. I'm going to pause here and move on and get to this a little bit later on, but I bring it up to the forefront because evaluation is always best if you plan it at the beginning, and then we'll go over why these prompts are helpful at the end of our session today. I'm going to pause and just say, do you have any questions so far about really starting strong by aligning expectations through your first meeting and talking about things like communication, response time, meeting logistics, all of that? Any questions? Okay, let me ask you this before we go on to the next one. I just launched a poll here for everyone who's on the session. Can you tell me who has used an IDP? Great, looks like, okay, lots of yeses, lots of nos, more yeses than nos right now. All right, I'll give you another minute to respond. Few folks left to go. Who else has used an IDP, or who else has not yet used an IDP? IDP, of course, standing for Individual Development Plan, if you're new to this tool. All right, it looks like about 62% of you have used one and 38% have not. So we're going to spend some time talking about this. And even for those of you who have used it before, I hope going over this maybe gives you ideas on how you might revamp or revise a tool that you're already using. And as always, please go ahead and type questions in the chat as we're going through this. All right, so 4 tools I'm going to mention today is first RAND, then I'm going to get into the individual development plan, then the mentor-mentee agreement, then evaluation. Simply put, though, as I mentioned already, RAND stands for Reminder, Agenda, Notes. So these are basic logistics that help align expectations when mentorship is starting. And people have different feelings about how formal to make their mentorship. However, these tools have brought a lot of success, particularly in cross-cultural mentoring, because it allows us to meet and also put things concretely into writing. So RAND stands for reminders. So the mentee sends a meeting reminder to the mentor or mentoring team before each meeting. They have an agenda. So with that reminder, include an agenda of the 3 to 4 bullet points that you want to discuss. And then during that meeting, have the mentee take notes that are then distributed after the meeting to everyone on the mentoring team. I'm curious here, who likes to use an agenda or who has already been using agenda in your mentoring meetings? I just put the poll up for you to respond. Sometimes I see some yeses. One knows, couple sometimes. Yeah, so this doesn't, people have diverse opinions about this, but again, I think particularly when you're mentoring across countries with distance, with culture, this helps clarify some of the important discussion points and action points in a research project, and it can allow everyone to stay, especially if someone misses a meeting or needs to follow up on a meeting, it allows you to have some written documentation of what's happening. So in addition to RAND, these reminders, agendas, and notes, these are some tips on how a mentee, particularly, and as a mentor, you can share this with mentees, may want to run that time you have together, especially with mentoring teams when you are all difficult to coordinate on a calendar, and yet it's so critical to have those meetings regularly. So you might want to just start by having a first 5 to 10 minute check-in, and then making sure that you get to the most pressing items in the agenda first, especially if there's something that's more urgent around your research project, for example, not being able to access supplies, delays with the ethics board or IRB, making sure pressing items are addressed first in the meeting. Then moving to less pressing items for the next 20 minutes, discussion perhaps about the nuts and bolts of your research and progress you're making, things that are coming down the line. Then having some opportunity to summarize those important things you discussed in your meeting, again, taking notes that will be distributed to everybody. And then, if possible, allowing some time for some extra issues to arise. So this would be, especially as mentors, making sure you're allowing some time for your mentees to share anything else that might be coming up in their life that will have an impact on their careers. This is part of kind of this cross-cultural or holistic mentoring, time just to say, how are you? How are you feeling? How is your family? And then being able to identify any additional challenges or larger external factors that might be causing delays in their work. Okay, next. The next tool we have is the individual development plan. Many of you have already mentioned that you've used this before. For those of you who are new, it's a development plan is a form that's actually required by the National Institutes of Health of trainees, and it allows you to really outline your job-related and career-related goals. It's a way to assess where your strengths are, where you also have gaps in knowledge and skills. And we found from research that trainees who complete an IDP are typically more satisfied and more productive with their research trajectory, and there tend to be fewer conflicts because things are clearly defined in an individual development plan. This is completed at the beginning of a mentorship, and it's revised and updated throughout. And I'm actually going to pull up an example right now so you can see an example. Meanwhile, while I'm pausing to do this, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat.
So there's one question in the chat. Do co-mentors contribute to the plan?
That's a great question. Yes. So are you all seeing the IDP in front of you right now?
Yes.
Okay, great. That's a really good question. Yes, co-mentors are also part of this plan. The way we've done it, and you may have different experiences, please feel free to add them into the chat if you do. I'm going to share this example, which actually comes from Ethiopia. And yes, to the answer, I will send out these slides afterwards. So you'll all get this as well as an evaluation survey. So we have a plan that we develop for our program and share with our mentors and mentees, and they're allowed to change it or revise it as needed. If you're an individual mentor, you can come up with what makes sense for you. And if you Google individual development plans, you will come up with a variety of examples, and I can share a few back to you as well if you have particular questions or need a particular format. So I'm going to talk through this one quickly, just to share the highlight of something from the MEPI Scholars, the MEPI Junior Scholars Program, which was a training grant in Ethiopia. Some of you on this call have probably completed this IDP actually, or used one very similar to this in your own program. But the IDP overall includes very similar elements, although it may be short or long. And there are some very extensive ones out there, by the way, when you Google them. So first, obviously, start with some sort of instruction on why this IDP is important. The key here, of course, is to use it as a communication tool and not just as a busy work document. And I will say, when we've evaluated our international training program, the feedback from trainees is that it's very useful to go through this exercise for themselves, and as well as talking about it with their mentors and mentees. Basic information. It's helpful to start with some sort of assessment of where trainees are. How are they spending their time? You may have different categories here, but it is really helpful to know, since we are all so busy, where is your mentee spending the time right now? And if something needs to change in order to accomplish their research goals, right? So where are they spending their time, and does anything need to change? In this particular program, they were receiving coverage for their research, and it was really important that mentors help mentees adjust their schedules to meet this requirement of 75% of their time going towards research, right? So first, some sort of assessment of where they are. Then the second component here is really asking about long-term goals. So this can be really tough to write down about yourself, and mentors can be very helpful in guiding maybe more detail on this, or more realistic timelines along goals. Maybe perhaps mentors can even imagine better and bigger career goals than the trainee, right? So this is really important as a mentor to think about how you can share big picture ideas with your trainees. All right, so the mentee will complete this, but you'll review it and help them revise it. So what are their career goals overall? What are their specific research goals? And then how does their research training, in this case, it was MEPI Scholars, but how's the training program going to contribute to them achieving those goals? Then the next section, which is typical in an IDP, is some sort of assessment of current strengths and weaknesses. So what are you really good at as a mentee? Is it qualitative research? Is it quantitative research, data and analysis? Is it surveillance data? What is it that you're really good at? It's always helpful to share those things with your mentor and your mentoring team. And then where do you see weaknesses or gaps? Maybe there's a particular analytical approach that you need more training on. Maybe you feel like you lack confidence in writing a systematic literature review, and that's something you need to fill in as a whole. So really think about, what are you interested in completing? And perhaps this is coming through your training program. So your strengths and your weaknesses. Then you would talk through, what are some specific action you can take in your training over the course of the next several years to really address these weaknesses or gaps in skills, right? So let your mentors know some of your preliminary plans of how you may attend trainings, professional development, meet with faculty, take courses in order to meet these gaps. And they can really look at this and tell you whether they feel like that's going to be a good use of the mentee's time. And then in this research project, or in this program, there's an independent research project. And so we asked some details about that. You may not have this category at all if there's not an independent research project, or you might add something else in, right? That might allow you to discuss a project or goals they have coming in the future. Since this is a research training program, we also asked them to start brainstorming ideas about future funding and publications. This is critical, right, to the path of an independent investigator. And again, a mentee may struggle filling in some of these parts of this IDP, but as a mentor, you can offer suggestions here. And this is why this is such a helpful tool to put some concrete goals on paper. It's like a to-do list. You're more likely to get things done if you can cross it out and put it on paper. An IDP is very similar. And also, it allows you to have a clear sense as a mentor about what your mentees are thinking about as goals and how you can contribute to maybe helping these goals become more feasible, or perhaps for a further reach if they need to think bigger. Also, we asked them to list professional conferences they want to go to. And you can see here there's space for written comments from both the in-country mentor and the international mentor. And we do ask the scholars and the mentors to sign the IDP and submit it back to the program, so we know we're meeting our requirement for the National Institutes of Health, the NIH. But we also know that meetings are happening regularly between the scholars and their mentoring team. And if you see here, when you were asking if there's contribution from both mentors, we do have both the in-country, both mentoring mentors on the team sign it. So that's one example of an IDP. I'm happy to send this out and share this with everybody. And you could take this and alter it and revise it in a way that makes sense for the type of mentoring you're doing. Any questions about the IDP?
Don, I don't know if you mentioned, but how often do you recommend sort of revisiting the IDP?
Great question. Thanks, Russell. I think you should do the IDP at the beginning of your mentoring relationship. I will say it may take, if a trainee is starting a program, it may take a month or so to understand the program well enough to actually complete the IDP. And then I would say you could revisit it depending on your program, 6 months, or at the minimal every year, it should be updated, depending on how fast work is occurring and if there's a lot of change to the research projects in the career. Great question. Other questions? Okay. Slides are up again and you can see those okay? Okay, thanks.
Yes.
I also just speak to really encourage again this piece that it's a communication tool and not just a form. I've provided you with some questions that you can use as a mentor that are broad but prompt, open conversation about the content of the IDP. So tell me about filling it out. What parts were easiest? What parts were difficult? What parts were you unsure about? When would we like to review it again? Kind of speaking to the question that was just asked. And is there anyone else who should look at it? So you may have 2 mentors on your team, but are there other folks, department chairs, colleagues that might want to review it to provide some helpful feedback? I also, this tip at the bottom here that says you may want to record mentors, the meetings, this has actually come from a number of trainings I've done with mentees who say sometimes there's so much information overload. And if you're speaking across cultures too, where you have some language interpretation that's going on, it could be helpful to record this meeting so that a mentee can revisit it in the future to make sure they clarify and understand what was being said, especially in a meeting like this where there's a lot of information.
We have a question in the chat that says, what is your experience on the impact of IDP to the mentee and mentor?
Sure. I think what we've heard back from our evaluation about the IDP is that for trainees, sometimes it's the first time they've been asked to think concretely in one place and at one time about their strengths and where they want to grow as a trainee, as well as really think carefully about their immediate, so their short-term goals, as well as their long-term goals, and then have a conversation about those goals with the input from mentors. And so I think bits and pieces of this can happen in mentorship throughout the relationship without an IDP. But with an IDP, you're really clarifying those things from the beginning. And again, this session is about aligning expectations. And this is one tool that allows mentors and mentees to really be clear with each other about those expectations of the mentee's goals. So I think it is a clarifying tip, and it allows you to prevent missteps or miscommunication later on in the relationship. That's a great question. Thank you. I'm going to now show you an example of the next tool, which is a mentor-mentee agreement. Again, from a program, this one's actually from the United States. A word about mentor-mentee agreement. So the IDP focuses on the goals of the trainee, and that's all about their goals and deliverables from their research projects or their career goals. A mentor-mentee agreement is what they have to guide the actual relationship. So that's really important, right? And is a way to also align expectations and communicate what's going on between relationships. I'm going to pause for a minute even now here, and I'm going to, hold on. And I'm going to ask, hold on, who has used a mentor-mentee agreement? As I'm talking about it, you can complete that poll. So have you used a mentor-mentee agreement? Yes, no, or maybe. It can be really short. I've seen them as much as 5 bullet points. I've seen them long, like 4 or 5 pages. Ideally, it's outlining the expectations of the mentor's role. So what are they doing in the relationship? And outlining the expectations of a mentee. What are they doing in a relationship? And it is not a legal contract. I think this is really important to mention, especially in cultural contexts. It is an agreement or a compact. It is not legally binding. It is something that 2 people mutually outline and come to agreement on. So again, not a legal contract. Really important to understand and communicate as a mentor. Setting these expectations in the beginning allows you, again, to stop and evaluate along the way. Are you meeting your expectations? Are you doing what you said you were going to do? And if not, there's time for course correction before things get way out of line and take up too much of your time if things go wrong. So again, this is one method of being upfront to prevent miscommunication later on. Let me go ahead and show you an example and talk through it and get through some of those points on the slide. While I'm doing this, please feel free to ask questions. It looks like most of you have not used a mentor-mentoring agreement yet. If there's anyone else who wants to respond, please jump on the poll. Okay, a few of you have used a mentor-mentee agreement. I would love to know in the chat how that's worked for you and if you felt like that's successful. All right, you all seeing the mentor agreement in front of you?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So this is quite detailed, and this is for the NIH Career Development Award KL2 Scholar, so a training grant, a research training grant. And this is a programmatic, this was developed by the program. And so shout out to all the folks in the KL2 program who have completed these, are mentoring in these, or are mentees in these, and for letting us share this. And I've seen similar ones across international research training programs too. Just real quickly, always an explanation of why this agreement is being completed. And if you see here on your screen, you have the mentor agreement, which is outlining a number of bullet points that the mentor is agreeing to, or the mentor is agreeing to for this scholar. And then the mentee part is outlining what the mentee agrees to do in this relationship. So as mentor agreements go, this one is very detailed. So again, I've seen some that are less detailed. If you Google mentor-mentee agreements, you'll get a variety, and I'm happy to share some. But I'd like just to share some highlights from this agreement and why they're successful. Number 1, it has some clear asks in here, right? You'll attend the orientation session to learn about the program, right? You will attend mentor training, right, to ensure that you have the skills necessary to be a mentor in the program. You'll review their individual development plan, right? So linking the mentor agreement to the actual tool. You'll meet on a regular basis. You'll meet with the program directors as needed. You'll provide feedback on the mentee. You'll provide feedback on scientific writing. You'll connect the scholar with professional networks, right? You'll promote them, you'll promote ethical standards and help them through ethical decisions about their research. You'll give them proper credit, right? Really important to have that up front in your agreement between mentors and mentees. You'll give them guidance on the NIH rigor and reproducibility guidelines, right? You'll give feedback and constructive comments throughout the process. And also that you have a commitment to supporting your mentees with equitable and accessible mentoring, and that you'll be part of the evaluation of the program. So very concrete outlined responsibilities. on behalf of the mentor, which is great because as a mentor, when you're starting this program, you know what you need to accomplish. Now, there's a lot that happens outside of these bullet points, but these are some logistics that are really key. And then again, it prevents surprises or miscommunication down the line. You're welcome to put into the chat anything you have questions about, or if you see anything missing, right, from that side of the agreement. Now, the other part of this agreement, and they both get it, and they both, this is a lead mentor. So on this one, we don't have the mentoring team sign it, but you very well could have the mentoring team sign it. We have the mentee agreement, which is what the mentee agrees to do in this mentoring relationship. So one, take primary responsibility for the development of their own career, right? Discuss their IDP with their mentor, revise and review and revise their projects and their goals and timelines as needed. Maintain good research records and be thoughtful about research ethics, applying standards of the NIH to their research projects, all really important to have explicitly in a document and an agreement before research commences. Assumes a responsibility and management as the project progresses, aims to have open and honest conversations with their mentor about their status, right? So that a mentor really can jump in and help and support in the ways that are most appropriate. This includes perhaps sharing challenges and obstacles in the research process. Be responsive to advice and constructive criticism, work respectfully with colleagues, and actively seek out opportunities to support their research career. They also outline in the agreement the actual specific program requirements that come along with the funding for this training program. So meeting with the program directors, again, you can see this protected time that comes up. So putting in here the agreement to a commitment to their professional effort towards their research, completing their coursework and ethics and the NIH rigor and reproducibility guidelines, going through the IRB process, right? And then the requirement here with this training is submitting a grant by the end of the program and then crediting the grants and the NIH support for all of their work. And this is a very specific way, again, to share and communicate expectations of the mentor and mentee, and also in one document sharing kind of those mutual expectations of each other to help align those expectations at the beginning of the relationship. And of course, there's room for a signature and a date. And this, by the way, this may not be revisited if the mentorship is going well. However, if there's some challenges, it might be helpful as the mentor or mentee to pull forward this document at an annual review and say, you know, these things seem to be going really well, but perhaps we need to work on some of these other things that haven't been going as well that we agreed upon. Okay, any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat. Hang on, we're going to go back here. Great. Okay. And now our last tool for alignment, I'm going to give you one more poll here as I talk about it, is using evaluation as a means to align expectations in your mentoring relationship. So I'm asking you here in the poll, have you used an evaluation tool for your mentorship to check in and see how it's going? So far, everyone's saying no here. Please continue on that poll as I'm talking. So what's interesting is that some of the research on evaluating mentorship shows that mentees are very unlikely to feel comfortable giving honest advice about the mentoring relationships because they know mentors hold a lot of power and they have a lot of respect and admiration for their mentors. So in one qualitative study, when mentees were interviewed and asked if they would give feedback, they said things like, I'd never tell my mentor how they're doing. That's career suicide. Or giving feedback, suggesting ways to improve. No way. That would be the end of my career. And so I find it to be our job as mentors to make feedback as easy as possible for our mentees, and really building this into the relationship from the beginning can make it feel less stressful or punitive or scary for the mentees. All right, so just going back to our poll, it looks like 91% of you haven't yet used mentorship as an evaluation tool. So maybe this will prompt you and give you some new ideas on things that you can use in your relationship. I'm sharing with you one very simple tool. And you are seeing my slides again, right? Okay.
Yes.
Great. So I showed you this prompt in the beginning of the slideshow, and I'm getting back to it here. There are many tools, again, for evaluating with Likert scales and categories, and those are great if you have time and feel comfortable using those. Again, you can Google them. I'm happy to share them with you. But I really like these prompts because they are doable, feasible, and both mentors and mentees can talk about it. You can share these prompts ahead of time with your mentee and say, you know, hey, I'd really like to touch base about how our mentorship is going. Now, I would, in that beginning relationship with your mentee, tell them, I'm going to check in with you in 6 months, or let's check in together in a year, and, you know, really have time for course correction so that if anything isn't feeling good, we can adjust it and make it work better. So here are some simple prompts you could use. Aspects of our relationship that are working well. Our relationship could improve if. I need more of, or I need less of. Both the mentor and mentee can respond to those. The mentor might need more time to review the documents, right? They might need more advanced time to schedule the meetings. A mentee might need less discussion of how to write a literature review, more discussion of how to present at a scientific conference, right? So some really concrete ways to provide feedback together in a way that's constructive. So what's been most useful, what's been least useful, and then just a touch base about your communication and meeting, the quality and frequency of the communication is, how's it going? And then overall, you know, how are you feeling about how the relationship is going? Are there other things you could do differently to strengthen it? Other things you don't need to do? How could you be more efficient and make sure you're meeting your goals? So again, I'll send these slides out so you can have this. You could just pick 3 of these. Evaluation doesn't have to be long and complicated to be effective. Again, you're welcome to use more complicated tools, but I do really recommend ahead of time letting your mentee know, I'm going to check in. Here are some things we can talk about, and having you both come to the table with some feedback about how that relationship is going, and then leaving with a plan on how to make sure you're moving forward in the best direction possible. I will share the IDP and mentor agreement in Word documents so that you can use them as templates. Right after this meeting, we'll send out well, at least today, we'll send out an email with these slides, and I'll share both of these documents with you. And as already has been posted in the chat, we're going to ask you to complete an evaluation survey. All right. So any questions about evaluation, please go ahead and post them in a chat. I'll pause for a minute. All right. I don't see anything new.
Dawn, this is a really good point that I've never done the evaluating mentor relationship. So do you think it's a good idea to like have a dedicated session for this? Like you said, make it very clear like that this is going to happen, so everybody expects it, and then you have a committed amount of time to kind of go over these things. I don't know. It does seem like it could be a challenging thing, especially for mentees. Like if you have a group of mentors, I'm just imagining like, you know, you have one mentee and you got like 4 co-mentors, you know, you're all meeting together. This could be a little bit of, you know, intimidating to approach some of these topics. So I'm just thinking even ahead of like, you know, how do you make these very productive and valuable sessions, and, you know, constructive feedback, and don't make the mentee kind of feel like overwhelmed or intimidated.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. And, you know, you may not get complete honesty from the mentee. I mean, that might, depending on the mentoring relationship, you may or may not get a lot of feedback. I still think the opportunity is really important. We could offer to send it ahead of time and have them send some notes to you written as well to talk about in your meeting. So they can, this is why I think you need to give it to them ahead of time, is just have them think of ways they can respond that feel comfortable. I think if you're with a mentoring team, I would really encourage you as the lead mentor to guide this in a way that's productive. And again, you could just use 3 bullet points, you know, pick 3 that are most important to you and address those 3 bullet points. so you could pick things that feel more comfortable based on the level of trust you have in your relationship. But I think
Yeah.
some sort of pulse taking is important.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. Or I'm just thinking even maybe approaching it as like, if as the lead mentor, like what are things that we're not giving, what are helpful things we're providing or things we could do better. Yeah. Maybe just like how you approach it, and sort of each relationship will probably take a different path, to kind of talk about these things.
Yeah, and I really
But
like
yeah.
your idea of having committed time to it without putting too much added pressure on the meeting, like, ooh, I've got to show up for a meeting to evaluate, like that could feel maybe
Yeah.
a little daunting. But I do think I like the way you're phrasing it. And I often think this as a mentor too. Like, I think asking questions like, I know on your first draft, I provided a lot of feedback. You were able to integrate a lot of it. How helpful was that? Is there more you need to know from me? I think, that providing some questions to the mentee that might be easier for them to respond with a yes, that was helpful, or no, maybe I need more of this. So I think, this is really up to a mentor to lead this conversation. And not to press a mentee if they feel uncomfortable. I know some mentees do really feel uncomfortable, but there are other mentees who are very happy to give you feedback.
Yeah. Okay. No, this is helpful. Thank you.
And I would try not to make it personal. I would try to make it concrete about the work. Right? So maybe along with this, you review the IDP, and you could say things like, I noticed on your IDP, one of your areas you wanted to improve on was being able to write, do your discussion section, or to be able to submit 2 manuscripts. We haven't met that goal. How are you feeling about that? Like, do we need more of that in the mentorship? So I think you could link some of these prompts back to some of those other tools that you have.
Yeah, no, I agree. The baseline IDP, I think, really gives you a good framework about, the progress you've made, and, how far you've come, and, what things maybe haven't been successful, and good points to talk about.
Yeah. And I think also in this meeting, I would probably, I would not want to, do heavy if there's a challenge with a research project or, funding. I can see I'm getting another Zoom notification. I'm really sorry. I am at Emory. I just want to say, I don't know why my Zoom is not working very well today. So I think, what was I going to say? I think leaving room again for more like, how are things going overall? Like, maybe that extra 10 to 15 minutes of kind of thinking holistically about people. You might want to make sure you have some of that time here too. Because sometimes we do a case study, maybe we'll get to it in one of our other sessions, but if things aren't going well, we don't always know as mentors why that's the case. It might be a lack of understanding of skills. It might be a lack of understanding of expectations. It might be a lack of desire to pursue the work anymore. It might be something poor in the mentoring. So sometimes not rushing and allowing some space in the meeting is really helpful to learn about some of those things that wouldn't come out otherwise.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. And there are power dynamics involved in mentoring. So these are really important things to consider. And if it's short feedback, at least there was an opportunity. That's the way I look at it. And you're setting the precedent for maybe having a check-in down the line that might go better, right? All right, so just some kind of summary tips on thinking about aligning expectations as we're just about out of time. And if you would, thank you for Lesia for putting in the survey link for the evaluation. We are reporting back our evaluation data on our own grant and our own funding. So I tried to keep it as short as possible for you to complete that survey. We greatly appreciate it. But when you're talking about aligning expectations and being mindful of these tools, do remember we all come from different backgrounds, social identities, experiences with mentoring, cultural background, disciplinary training. A lot of trainees come in with an idea of supervision versus mentoring. So really thinking about how those things might be different. And as a mentor, we may need to help share what these mentoring relationships really look like, how they can be beneficial for both the mentor and the mentee. Also, remember that you do all this strong work up front to continue to check in. Expectations change over the course of mentoring, depending on the advancement of the mentee, the skills they have, and what they need. Share your own experiences, right? That's part of aligning your expectations, is for your mentee to know who you are and what worked for you and what mistakes you were able to overcome. And then I've said this a couple of times, try to build in some extra time just to ask your mentee, what's going on? What have we missed? What haven't we talked about? And how else can I be helpful? Just allow some free time for new issues and ideas to be revealed. That's all I have for today. We are at the hour. If there are any questions, you're welcome to add them into the chat. If not, if you would, please click on that evaluation survey, take a few minutes to complete it. And a reminder that we have our next session on August 24th, where we'll talk more about some strategies specifically for distance mentoring to help strengthen those relationships. And we would love to have you and hear your experience with that as well. And thank you so much for being here this morning, this afternoon, this evening. This is a great way to have some international collaboration across TB researchers and mentors internationally. And we're so happy you took the hour to be here with us. And we're going to record this and we'll distribute those tools we discussed later today or tomorrow at the latest. So you have those as part of your toolbox. And that's it for today, everybody. Thanks for joining.